Ladies and gentlemen of the press, everybody here, I welcome you, and of course first I want to congratulate Matteo Salvini with the results of the elections in Italy. Matteo, very big success. So the results of the elections in Italy are a big blow to the EU extremists, to the aggressive EU radicals that want to submit the people of the member states to a Soviet-style superstate. I remind you that the communist regimes of Stalin and Mao tried to annihilate the 1,000-year-old cultures of their states. They tried to force the individual citizens into a rigid uniformity of thought and behavior, and they applied the tactics of moving millions of citizens from one part of their empire to another just to destroy their identity. And we see the same perverted tactics in the European Union, such as the import of millions of migrants. And the peoples of the EU member states are starting to feel the consequences. The abolishment of free speech, the rapes, the murders, the terror attacks, the disruption of peaceful demonstrations. And therefore the victory of Eurosceptic parties in Italy is not just a victory of morality, it's a victory of reason over the dark forces of greed and lust for power. It's a step away from the suicide of Western civilization. And a majority of EU member states is in the making that rejects the repulsive migrant policy of Juncker and Merkel, of the Soros open society policy of mass migration. This majority will break the backbone of this failed globalist project. The decision of the Italian voters must lead to a government that truly reflects this decision. A government that no longer accepts the dictates from the globalist elite, a government that gives Italy back to the Italians, and that is a government of Matteo Salvini, which I now give the floor.
Grazie. Tendo a ringraziare.
Thank you. I'd like to express a word of thanks to all my friends from the ENF group, with whom we continue to enjoy excellent working cooperation. We've just had a clear message from Italy. Please. I'd much rather be speaking on my own if you don't mind. If anybody's bothered by the applause, perhaps you could go out. You won't have to listen to it then. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's reasonable to expect a polite attitude from journalists, isn't it? Would you allow me to speak? If you're not happy about the results of the elections, I'm sorry for you. Anybody who wants to applaud is quite allowed to do so.
Onorevole Salvini, ci sono delle regole?
Mr. Salvini, there are rules. I'm very sorry, I was speaking, sir. If you don't like the results of the elections, I'm sorry to hear that. This is the great thing about the election result. There are so many people on the left who are suddenly worried, and the more people on the left are worried, the happier I am. So I think you as journalists should learn a bit about manners. In recent years, you've treated the League as some kind of loser, as the dregs of society, but the Italian people seem to believe the opposite. We've had a clear demonstration of this. This has provided a clear demonstration that the European Union, which is decided around a table giving no voice to citizens, doesn't work. At the same time, we have all these journalists who are simply pumping out the propaganda of the European Union for consumers of Europe rather than the men and women of Europe. You, in the press room in Strasbourg, seem to be asleep. There are people who are happy about the results on Sunday. Mamma mia. So, to our foreign friends here, I'd just like to ask you, can you imagine the conditions which we achieved this victory? The newspapers can write whatever they want. The journalists can stay or they can leave, I don't care. So what we're doing now is working to set up a government. We are representing the wishes of the people thanks to our government and previous governments, the public debt has reached record levels. We've seen increases in the pension age. We've seen cuts to funding for local authorities, hospitals, museums, police forces. We've lost control of half of major Italian companies, which are now in foreign hands. We intend to do exactly the opposite. And if you expect the next government in Italy to increase taxes and decrease VAT, I can promise you that we'll do the opposite. We will cut taxes in Italy to bring them down to 15%. A flat tax, which is now in place in 7 countries in the European Union. In other words, it will be difficult for anybody in Berlin, Brussels or Frankfurt to refuse that. We will be able to do it because others already have. We also want to create improve relations between the people of Italy and the tax authorities. We've also committed ourselves to school reform. On immigration, I've read that the European Commissioner very much respects the Italian vote and says that the Italian government's line won't change, but I suggest you leave it to the Italian people to decide what their position is on immigration. With the League in government, there will be less expulsions because less immigrants will be landing in the country. Anybody who escapes from war clearly needs help. But the fact is that Europe has now been attracting millions of people running away from war to Europe. We will set out our priorities in a peaceful, serene way. The banking directive, the Bolkestein directive, agricultural policy, trade policy, major agreements which favour major internationals rather than SMEs. Both in Rome and in Brussels. We want to maintain peace and work for peace. And clearly we are committed to good relations with Russia, which is the exact opposite of what Brussels strangely seems to have opted for over the last few days. And given that Europe has to be based on peace, it's interesting that we still have a pre-candidate in Turkey and an enemy in Russia. I hope that the Italian vote will prove to be an initial taste of what awaits us in other countries. We'll be following very closely work to form a government over the next few months. I would also like to congratulate our French friends for their courage and the results of the FN Congress in Lille over the weekend. You've achieved a great deal. Our vote on Sunday shows that what lots of people are saying under their breath is now going to happen. Next year's European Parliament elections will no longer be a showdown between the centre-right and the centre-left. The EP elections next year will give people the right to take back their identity and to take their demands to Brussels and Strasbourg. Next year will be a fantastic year. I hope that I'll have the honour of governing my country. We stated clearly in our manifesto that without going to any back deal rooms, we're committed to sending Renzi out of power, and he has to pay the price for what he's done. So we have a responsibility. The centre-right won with 12 million votes. Meanwhile, the centre-left got less than 6 million votes. We're the largest party in the north. But for the first time in my political career, I've won voters throughout the country: Sardinia, Sicilia, the south, Abruzzo, Campania, the city of Rome, where we got 162,000 votes. We're the largest centre-right party in Rome. So I think we're very well placed. So when it comes to the current policies we're seeing of the suicide of the European Union, we're not going to give in to that. We're scared of nothing, including elections. We are committed to governing. That's part of our manifesto. We think that Italian people should be able to retire when they deserve to retire. We should be increasing the income of young people. We should ensure that we maintain the sovereignty of all countries. We need to defend our borders. And we will ensure that the rights which have been taken away from the people of Europe in recent years should be restated. And the right above all to hope. EU policies in recent years have taken away people's hopes and dreams of the future. I'm not sure what's happened elsewhere, but in Italy we've seen quite terrifying statistics when it comes to the economic and social situation. The number of children born, for example. 464,000 children were born in Italy last year. That's the worst figure we've seen for 50 years. That's the type of statistics that the Italian government under Salvini will be trying to reverse. As far as the 3% figure for GDP is concerned, if we can respect it, all well and good, but I think we're perfectly entitled to ignore it if it's necessary. So we will be looking at the number of children born in our country rather than figures such as the interest rate spread. And if somebody wants to applaud me on that, I'll be delighted. Thank you.
Adesso rigoroso silenzio.
And silence now, please. Any questions? Go ahead.
Anna Balensky from Europe Diplomatic. Mr. Salvini, your policies, your key policies are always very confrontational with the European Union. But you are not the only one in the European Union, for example, who is against mass migration policy, like Viktor Orban. And he meets a hostile reaction of the European Union. How can you see the reaction, your governance within this framework? And are you prepared to offer to Italian people a referendum on membership in the European Union?
Ma innanzitutto politiche più serie, non dico severe.
Above all, we need more serious policy making, not severe policy making immigration. That's what Hungary's been doing. So a few examples ago we saw Mr. Macron, the champion of the European Union, the saviour of the European Union. He's actually doing a copy and paste of Marine Le Pen's policies. Macron, the friend of all Europeans, when he says that there is no future for economic migrants in France, these people are trying to escape war, and those trying to escape war will be allowed into Italy. For those not escaping war, their only future is a trip home. So Orban clearly is somebody who Antonio Tommaso thinks is an evil man. Perhaps he can go and chat to the champion of Europeanism in Paris. Some people say, unfortunately, unlike other countries, Italy so far hasn't supported change to the constitution. That will be part of our government programme over the next 5 years, but it's not something we'll be doing overnight because it's simply not feasible.
Leonardo Panetta, Mediaset. Onorevole Salvini.
Mr. Salvini, you've excluded the possibility of working with Renzi, but you don't have enough seats to form a government yourself, so something has to give somewhere. Do you exclude the possibility of the League? Renzi? Who is your candidate? We're currently working on a government programme for the next 5 years based on our work in terms of the emerging economy. It's up to the Parliament to do that, not the parties. Our government programme will, I hope, glean a majority, and in that case I'll be delighted to govern our country for the next 5 years. So I'm sure that there'll be efforts to prevent us forming a government. However, if there are enough parties which support the centre-right programme, and if we can get support from members from other groups who undertake in writing to support the first 5 points of our programme over the first 12 months, fine. However, we've seen that the Italian people kicked out a whole bunch of politicians last week, and we won't be counting on their support, not at all.
Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, dann darf ich auch hier das Wort ergreifen. Sie
Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps I could take the floor and welcome you. I'm from the Freedom Party in Austria. We have government responsibility now. We're part of the government, and we can show how things can go differently. Just a few key areas. So first of all, congratulations to Matteo Salvini, a real warm congratulations to you. Secondly, we are in a reform process of the EU now. If you know the white paper of the European Commission, the 5 scenarios of the future, and Austria, I think, with its government participation, has focused on point 4, which is less cooperation so that where there is cooperation, it's done in a better and more effective way. And one of these areas would be protection of the external borders of the EU. If we do have cooperation in the EU, well, I think if we have less, it gives room for manoeuvre for the member states, for the people. They can stop, they can take a breath, but still work together in friendship and cooperate where we want to. And what we're doing in Austria is looking at these areas of migration, of climate change, of tackling criminality, all of these areas where over the past years we've seen negative developments. We're trying to repair these areas. We are part of the government now. We've put a lot of measures in place already. We've seen resistance internationally and in Austria as well. But what we can also see is that the people are giving us their support. There were 3 elections in Austria recently, and we have made significant progress. There's an election coming up in Salzburg, an important province in Austria, where we're also expecting to see growth. We should take this cooperation in Europe seriously. We should discuss it on a serious basis. We are party representatives. We represent parties here in Europe. Those who raise their voices and say we want to be friends, we want to cooperate, we have nothing against working together in important areas, but we are careful that there isn't too much centralisation in Brussels, that our parliaments in our home countries still have the possibility to have self-decision in important areas, that we can safeguard our democracy, that we can have those possibilities. That is what we're trying to achieve with our parties. So that is why I am very pleased that with Lega, previously the Lega Nord party, had such a sensational success, and I think it's an important step forward in the reform process in Europe, which is something which is necessary. It's good for the people in Europe, for democracy, for friendship, and for the prosperity in our continent. Thank you.
Mesdames et messieurs, merci de votre...
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this morning. In particular, I'd like to thank Matteo Salvini for joining us despite these busy days in Italy for him. The Europe of Freedoms has gone through an exciting time. The ideas we defend, a Europe of nations, cooperation and freedom, are clearly taking hold throughout Europe. And there's clearly a growing desire emerging throughout Europe to create a different Europe, a Europe which respects peoples, which respects nations, which respects European identity, protecting our people from mass immigration and defending the security of citizens, which is undermined by total free movement. We need economic cooperation so as to ensure that we genuinely serve the interests of our people. The coalition which our friends from the FPÖ set up in Austria a few months ago, which has already rolled out a series of measures which match voters' desires. More long-standing victories of political movements in Poland and Hungary, which are similar in many ways to the ideas of our political family, even if they're not directly members. But their projects are very much in line with what we want. And more recently, the fantastic victory of the League and the centre-right coalition in Italy. That clearly demonstrates what direction history is moving in. The people of Europe want to take back control of their destiny. They're not anti-European, they just want a different Europe. They want a Europe which is more democratic, which respects the wishes of the people, and which finally starts protecting our fundamental interests. The victory of the League is threefold. First of all, the victory of the coalition which the Liga is part of. Secondly, the victory of the Lead within the coalition as the biggest party. And finally, the victory of Matteo Salvini and his strategy, that's to say, spreading out to the whole of Italy. The League is taking root throughout the country, going beyond the confines of its traditional stronghold in the north. That underlines the strength of the movement. So I'm delighted that Matteo is with us in Strasbourg today. And I do hope that next time he comes, he will be coming as head of the Italian government. Because the elections have now given him the legitimacy he needs to form a government so as to defend and protect the interests of the people of Italy in line with the manifesto which was so resoundingly supported in the election.
Prego.
Go ahead. Mr. Salvini, you stated very clearly that you would not be willing to govern together with the party which lost. And you, at the same time, you opened up your programme to anybody who wants to support it. Do you think you'd be able to create a contract, somewhat German-like contract, like what the SPD and the German CDU have just done? Is that in the air? You referred to the difficulties you face because of the figures. And this is the risk that your government might be stillborn. I'll do everything to ensure that we have a government for 5 years in Italy. A government which will, anybody who wants to support our proposal for the government will have to commit themselves to support us for the first 12 months to cancel the Fornero law, for example, which removes pension rights of millions of Italians, will reduce the tax rate to 15%, which we think is the best way of stimulating the economy in the country, and to allow us once again to take control of immigration, allowing those who are entitled to come in, and those who aren't will be forced to leave. We'll also pursue the reform of the school system and the judicial system, and our experts have been working on that. That's our basic programme for the first 12 months. I remain confident. I'm not thinking so much about support from the leaders of the parties. I'm talking about those who are elected by citizens who want jobs and security. In the light of that, I'll remain optimist right through to the end. We won't be in government for 6 months, but for 5 years. Go ahead.
Sergio Cantone, Euronews.
Euronews. My question. You just said that there's a possibility that you wouldn't respect the 3% deficit figure. Microphone's been cut off. This. No, you need a microphone, sir. Is that a political message to underline the fact that Italy might gradually start moving away from the euro before one day leaving it? That's one hypothesis. A second question, I would like to know whether you also congratulated your Austrian colleagues for their idea of omitting Austrian passports for inhabitants of South Tyrol in Italy. I don't intervene in the work of other governments. I leave it to them to decide what they should do. As far as the 3% figure is concerned, as I said, that's one of the European rules which is drawn up in smoke-filled rooms, and we're quite happy to respect that if the people want it. However, if those rules mean that we have to close down factories and create job insecurity, no. So if we can respect it, fine, all the better. I'll be happy. But over the next 2 years, if we have to find 31 billion euros to compensate for the increase in VAT and so on, in that case, the best thing would be not to increase those taxes. We will negotiate with Brussels in a calm, serene way. And clearly, if they want us to stay in the European Union, they will have to respect our demands. The euro is an ill-conceived project, an ill-conceived currency. It's not possible for us to abruptly leave the euro. Our experts, some of whom were elected to Parliament, are working on a plan B. And so far, Brussels has firmly said no to our plans. So our people who will be negotiating will be well informed and responsible. They want to change the basis for our position in the European Union, which has been causing sustainable damage to the people and economy of Europe, as statistics demonstrate. We will continue to send common sense experts to renegotiate the directives I've just referred to. And if that doesn't work, I can't exclude any possibility. However, an abrupt exit from the euro is not something which we're calling for. If a majority of members of the government want to talk once again about revisiting economic policy, we will support them.
Marie Devon pour QH Info.
Hello, Marie Devon. Do you not think that the vote in the Italian legislative elections is not so much about a rejection of the EU as it exists today, but against traditional parties, as was the case in France?
Sì, anche.
That's part of the explanation, but it's not just a protest vote. In some of the major industrial areas of the country, the Venice region, Lombardy, Bergamo, Weatherly got more than 40%. Treviso, we got more than 35%. Venice and Lombardy, those two regions represent approximately 1/3 of GDP in Italy. So we've heard people asking us to improve the government's work. It's true that the vote is a rejection of the elite, that's part of it. But above all, it's a vote calling for serious, professional government with a forward-looking approach. So I think there are both aspects involved.
Thomas Meyer from Standard aus Österreich.
I have two questions to Mr. Salvini, if I may. You were 2 years ago in this room with Marine Le Pen, who was then the head of the National Front, and you said it was the aim that the European Union, as it was after the Maastricht Treaty, to destroy the European Union. So is this target still applicable? And bearing in mind the comments from Mr. Volinsky as well, the Austrian Chancellor said the opposite in Brussels. It talked about integration in the EU and the issue of subsidiarity as well. So how would you evaluate your partner, the Chancellor? And second question to what Mr. Volinsky said. 3 months in government now. It's not just work at European level. There was a scandal within the party as well. And what is your evaluation of that? And thirdly, having worked here a number of years, I'm a little bit surprised that we have these applause here in the press room. Is this the new tradition here in the European Parliament?
Sanzioneremo con la reclusione fino a 5 anni chiunque.
Anybody who implores this will be subject to prison sentences of up to 5 years in the European Parliament in the future. How about that then? Okay, I'm sorry, I just can't understand what you're talking about, but maybe I'm stupid. I'm dumbfounded by these reports of Nazi songs. However, I would advise opposition, or those opposed to the League, the FPÖ, or the National Front, to base their attacks on such rumours. Over the last 2 months, we've had an election campaign. We talked about work, taxes, pension, security, whereas others were just harking on about the risk of fascism. We've seen dozens of anti-fascist demonstrations, but no fascists. The people of Italy voted quite clearly. So, people can sing whatever they want in their shower. Some people sing Bella Ciao, the International. I love singing myself. We will, of course, work and cooperate with the Austrian government. We're not here to destroy anything. We're here to rebuild. And many pro-Europeans, and my homonym, Matteo Renzi, talks about going back to the Europe of Maastricht, a community. The European community was a fairy tale. A community of equals. The European Union is something which we think is destructive. So we want to rebuild a genuine European dream. Those who want to simply destroy are members, I think, of the European Commission.
Herr Mayer, nur um hier
Dinge auch klarzustellen.
Well, just to make things very clear here, we've got an international public, and so it's important to be precise about what we talk about here. Firstly, you said, Marine Le Pen said her goal was to destroy the EU. That is not true. I was sitting here on this podium when she spoke. She spoke in French. She said the European Union is trying to destroy itself. That's what she said in French. So that's something quite different, that the EU was on the wrong path rather than actively doing something to destroy it. Secondly, the Lidderbuch issue. This is something that happened within the Freedom Party, but it is not the case as was reported. It was one of our candidates in a private, happened in a private meeting. And this person themselves withdrew after this scandal, just to be very clear. So there wasn't such a book within the Freedom Party. That wasn't the case. Now, when you talk about the Chancellor putting together the government programme with us, yes, we do want to have more subsidiarity. Yes, that is correct. In our member states, we want to be able to decide more things, not have everything at a supranationalist level. We don't want to have a huge amount of legislation at a central level. There's no understanding for Austria, for that level in Austria. And what we want was the fourth scenario, the European Commission, that in the white paper. So less cooperation, so we can focus more on cooperating where we need to, so we can cooperate better in areas such as protection of external borders. Yes, there were a few people who clapped some stuff, and it's nice when we celebrate something when we've had a success. And so those people are congratulating Mr. Salvini on an important step in the reform process.
Bonjour, Monsieur Salvini. Je m'appelle Oliver Green du journal autrichien. Je suis ici aussi content qu'il y a une telle joie dans cette salle. C'était dans ma carrière de journaliste une fois que j'ai vu une telle joie pendant.
I have rarely seen such joy in a press conference. I saw it once in Senegal with the Senegalese president, where his whole entourage clapped the whole time. A more specific question. You said you felt very committed to good relations with Russia, and you couldn't understand why the EU had chosen a path of confrontation with Russia. Yesterday, Prime Minister May said in the British Parliament that it is highly likely that the Russian government was behind the poisoning of a Russian citizen and his daughter, but around 500 people that were in the area as well. How should one react to such an action from the Russian government? What is your opinion on Russian aggression in Ukraine as well? Thank you.
Grazie, ma se certi comportamenti e certi crimini fossero...
If there is proof that such a crime had been carried out, obviously we condemn it roundly. But we've heard all sorts of rumours, including that Russia tried to influence Italian elections. We saw the result of what that was. So we want facts. We want facts and evidence. And we can see facts in Turkey, but Turkey's still a candidate for membership, receiving lots of money from the European Union. We have seen the damage which is being caused to Italian companies by the Russian embargo, some 10 billion euros. And I'm sure that we will see how the Russians vote this weekend. And if in Senegal they applaud their leader, I have no problem at all with us having the same practices as people in Senegal.
Merci beaucoup.
Abbiamo applaudito troppo.
Sorry, we've all applauded too much.